Hi, Abe.
Hello.
It's nice to see you.
Nice to be
Nice to
here.
finally meet you in person.
Yes, yes.
I want to give a shout out to Tatiana from Jewish Family Services for introducing me to you. So I'm really happy to have you here today because today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so I wanted to commemorate this day by having someone speak about their experience. So, tell me about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Abraham Silverman. My friends call me Abe, and I hope you'll call me Abe. I was born in a Jewish ghetto.
Mm-hmm.
In 1942, I wore the yellow star as was required by law for the first 2 years of my life.
Oh, really?
35,000 Jews in Iași were herded into an area that was normally occupied by 5,000 Jews. The family Freund took in my mother, who was pregnant with me. There was 15 people living in a two-room shack with a dirt floor.
Wow.
My father had been taken away 3 months before I was born to a slave labor camp in Bessarabia, along with 3,500 young Jewish men. He was only one of 700 that survived. However, if I just back up a bit,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to begin where my mother and father got married
Yeah.
in June of 1940.
Okay.
They got married illegally.
Oh.
Laws were passed. Romania adopted much of the Nuremberg laws that were passed by the Nazis.
Okay.
And one of those laws made it illegal for Jews to get married.
Oh, really?
But my mom and dad, who had been dating and were in love,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother didn't want to leave with her parents and leave my father behind,
Mm-hmm.
so there was a chuppah, a Jewish wedding canopy
Mm-hmm.
that was organized in a house,
Mm-hmm.
and a rabbi and his 12-year-old son came to the house to marry my mother and father.
Mm-hmm.
They held a ceremony. The rabbi and his 12-year-old son walked out the door, and they were both shot and killed right on the doorstep.
Oh my God.
And the Romanian Nazis came into the house and said, "That's what happens when you break the law." So that was the beginning of my mother and father's 69-year marriage. That was
On their wedding day, this happened.
this happened just minutes after my dad stepped on the glass and broke the glass, which is Jewish tradition.
Right.
Yes, so that was the beginning of the married life, and then, as I said, there was a pogrom in Iași in 1941 where
Mm-hmm.
Jews were rounded up, and they were put into synagogues, and the synagogues were torched. Several Jews were sent on a march to Transnistria, where they died along the way.
Oh my goodness.
I have a picture of a mass grave that I took in Romania in 1999 when I took my mother and
Oh, you went
father
back there,
back,
really?
which was a
Wow.
mistake.
Oh no.
But anyway, let's going back to 1942 when I
Mm-hmm.
was born in March of 42.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty much kept alive by the other residents of that shack. They went out scrounging for food at night, and they knew instinctively that if the Jewish people were to have any kind of future, they had to save the children. So there was an extra effort to ensure that my mother and I got something to eat when others were just dying of hunger, virtually dying of hunger on the streets. So again, my father, who had been taken away 3 months earlier,
Mm-hmm.
survived an awful experience. He was beat.
Yeah.
He was blind in one eye.
Oh.
He was starved. He had awful problems with lice and typhus, but he did survive, and he was liberated by the advancing Soviet army in 1944, as were we.
Okay.
He found his way back to Iași,
Oh, that's amazing.
and he recovered.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1947, he decided that he survived the Nazis, and he didn't want to live under communism. So my mother and father, myself, and a 1-year-old baby who was born in 1946, we escaped out of Romania.
How did you do that? Like, what was the journey like?
Well, the journey was very perilous. We were smuggled out of Romania by a Hungarian woman and a Russian soldier who were coyotes. They were for money smuggling people out of Romania.
Oh, wow.
We traveled by foot in ox carts through Hungary. I still have nightmares to this day because we were hidden under a hay in a ox cart traveling through the countryside, and there was a fire in the distance, and I was yelling, "Fire, fire," and my mother put her hand over my mouth to keep me quiet and almost smothered me. So to this day I still have
Trauma.
nightmares about being smothered. My father suffered all of his life. He had he had bouts of very deep depression. He had to undergo electric shocks for depression. My father was a mess all of his life, and my mother was also traumatized, and I was traumatized.
Well, for sure.
So when we spoke earlier about meant to be fate.
Yeah.
As I told you, I'm trying to write a book, and the name of my book is, or the title of the book is Bashert, which in Hebrew and Yiddish means meant to be.
Right.
So why did I decide on that name? Well, we wound up in a refugee camp in Vienna. We were waiting for passage to Palestine, but because of the British embargo, Jews weren't being allowed into Palestine.
What year was this?
This was 1947.
Okay.
We arrived in Vienna in the fall of 1947.
Wow.
So we were in this refugee camp waiting for passage. And then in 1948, Israel became a state. So the embargo was lifted. The doors were open. We were moved by the Jewish Agency to Bremen, Germany, to get on board a ship to go to Israel. And during routine health examinations, it was discovered that I had TB, tuberculosis, which was common in camp kids, in the refugee camp kids. So I was taken from my mom and dad.
Right.
And sent to Switzerland all by myself. I was 6 years old.
Oh my gosh.
And taken to a sanitarium run by French nuns who were very mean. And I cried every day of my life for 6 years. I missed my mother and father, my baby brother, but I survived. And while I was in the refugee camp, my dad's aunt, who had come to Canada in 1907 and lived in Moose Jaw, found my mother and father, who had gone back to Vienna.
Yeah.
They wouldn't leave me in Europe and go to Israel without me, so they went back to Vienna. And my dad's aunt found my mother and dad in Vienna through the Canadian Red Cross.
Wow.
And when I was finally released from the sanatorium and was reunited with my mother and dad, we were again sent to Bremen, Germany, and we got on board a ship called the Scythia, and and traveled to Canada and arrived in Canada on Pier 21 in Halifax on January the 23rd, 1949.
Wow. Let's go back to the refugee camp and the sanatorium. Can you? I don't know if you have memories of it, but what was a day like there? What was your life like there?
So a lot of what I've told you, or some of what I've told you, is because of the conversations I had with my mother.
Right.
My father would never talk about his experiences. His experiences were so traumatized him that he didn't want to relive them at all. So he suppressed much of those memories because he was dealing with severe depression.
Yeah.
So my memories go back very clearly to the time that we left Iași and traveled to the Hungarian border, much of it by train.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember also very clearly being met at the Hungarian Romanian border,
Wow.
and by this Hungarian woman and the Russian soldier, and being loaded up into the ox cart. I remember the traveling through the ox cart. I remember very well the miles that we walked through Hungary to get to the Austrian border. Of course, my memories are very vivid of the refugee camp and of the sanatorium.
Yeah.
Those memories are all very vivid.
Yeah.
But I was already, 5 and 6 years old.
Yeah, for sure. So the daily life in that refugee camp.
So the life in the refugee camp, by and large, was we were safe. That's number one.
Most important.
We were now safe. The food, we relied on food that was shipped from North America.
Oh.
We were getting canned meat, which turned out to be horse meat.
Oh.
But it was food.
Yeah.
And so we ate, not luxuriously, but it filled our stomachs.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't experience hunger in the refugee camp,
That's
but
good.
of course, in the ghetto in Romania, people died by the thousands.
Right.
25,000 Jews died, many of them of hunger. So hunger was a common problem during the war years. So my memories, I remember. Excuse me. I remember the nuns standing behind us with sticks. We had to eat boiled spinach. Boiled spinach supposedly was high in iron, which was which is good, an important part of the diet to deal with tuberculosis. To this day, the idea of boiled spinach.
Right, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, but I remember my father, who was dealing with a cousin that survived and also wound up in the same refugee camp as we were in, started to deal in black market chocolates and sugar.
Really?
So
Really?
so he sent me a box of chocolates and a picture of my little brother. I remember crying my heart out. But I also was a big hero because I'm not much of a chocolate eater, even back then.
Yeah.
So I gave all of the kids my chocolates, so I was a big hero.
Right. Wow. That's really, wow. I can't even imagine those experiences, and even for your father. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, going back to your the word that you used, fate.
Yeah.
It was, if I hadn't been examined and I hadn't found that I had TB, I would have been on a ship to Israel, not to Canada.
Wow.
That was absolute fate.
Yeah.
And much of what happened to me throughout my life has been faith.
Yeah.
We wound up on a Jewish farming colony in southern Saskatchewan, so I grew up without electricity, without running water, without a telephone. We had to use a horse and a sleigh in the winter because they didn't plow snow.
Right.
Walk to school, of course, which many kids did in those days.
Yeah. Not
And
so much now, for sure.
No, that's for sure. Had a chamber pot under the bed for emergencies.
Oh, wow.
In the middle of the winter.
Right.
Otherwise, we used the outhouse.
Yeah.
So, that's how I grew up.
So this is now in the 1950s.
1950s.
And
1950, we left Moose Jaw. My dad, who got a job. My dad was a butcher in Europe. So when he came to Canada, he went to work for Canada Packers in Moose Jaw.
Oh, yeah.
My mother became pregnant with my little sister. With my sister's not little anymore. And my dad got laid off, and he had heard about the Jewish Colonization Association and these Jewish farming colonies in Saskatchewan. There was 4 of them. So he applied for and was approved in the program. So in early June of 1951, we left Moose Jaw and went to Hoffer, Saskatchewan. And we lived for the first 7 months in the Teachridge. You know what a Teachridge is?
No.
Okay.
Tell me.
So schools throughout Western Canada, possibly throughout rural Canada, always had a barn and a house in the yard.
Okay.
And the house was for the teachers.
Oh.
Yeah. But at that time, the teacher was a young woman. She didn't want to live alone, so she lived with a family in Hoffer. The Teachridge was empty, so we moved into the Teachridge.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Until we got our farm. Yeah.
Wow. So what came to mind for me as you and your family were rebuilding your lives here in Canada. How was your father? Like, it seemed like to me he was just living, for the family.
That was my mother and father's entire life was devoted to their children.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That they were determined to make a better life for their children than they had, and they had it difficult. My mother had no education, and my father had a grade 3 education. So my mother was sent to work at the age of 10, varnishing furniture.
Age of 10.
At the age of 10, yeah.
In Romania.
In Romania, yes. I got my first job in Saskatchewan at the age of 11.
There you go.
Yeah,
wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. That's just amazing.
Yes.
So you're now, how old are you now by the time you moved to Hoffer?
So I was 9 years old when we arrived in Hoffer.
Okay.
1951, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And you were there for a few years, you said?
Well, we didn't live in Hoffer. We lived a mile and a half out of Hoffer on a farm.
Right.
And I left home in 1960 after I finished my school.
Okay.
I traveled to Winnipeg in a Sioux Security Motorways cattle truck.
Oh.
And got a job in Winnipeg. Started my job on January the 2nd, 1961.
Okay.
And met my wife in 1962.
Oh.
And we dated for 2 years. Got married in 1964. Had a baby girl in 1965. She's now 57 years old.
Wow.
And moved to Edmonton in 1966, and this is where I've made my home since 1966. Yeah.
So going back to faith and what your passions are, and so what made you decide to go to Winnipeg?
Well, most of the Jewish kids of my generation didn't want to stay on the farms, and they left. And Winnipeg was the destination of choice at that time because it had a large Jewish community, and so those of us that left the farm wanted to go to a big city. Winnipeg was a big city with a big Jewish community, so that's where I went, which is also true about many of the Jewish kids that I grew up with in the colony in Saskatchewan. Yes.
What I'm noticing from your story is that the Jewish community in general is pretty united. Like, you guys are really connected and really supporting each other.
Well, that is a common belief, but we're really no different than any other community.
Right.
We do have our strengths, of course. We do have very well-established Jewish institutions, our synagogues and our communities. We have a federation. I'm now an employee of B'nai B'rith Canada, which is the oldest human rights organization in Canada. We've been around since 1875. I also am a Alberta government on the board of the Alberta Government Anti-Racism Advisory Council. I do work with many communities in Edmonton and Alberta. I'm called upon by many when they have issues of racism and hate and what have you. I do a lot of lecturing.
Wow.
One of my favorite topics is Israel. I became a Zionist in 1948 in the refugee camp in Vienna, and so I do a lot of lectures on Israel as well. So that's my life now.
Wow. Well, okay, go back to the fate aspect, right? Like, your life obviously would be totally different if you were still in Israel, right?
Or were in Israel.
Yeah, that's right. But, you know, everything that you've talked about, especially towards the latter part of your life, I'm feeling that, you know, this is something that there's passion there, right? There's, you know, especially with the community, you know, serving the Jewish community. And what led you to become, you know, where you are today, working for B'nai B'rith?
So my work in community, not only in the Jewish community, but in the greater community, goes way back. I also served on the board of the Edmonton Economic Development Authority.
Wow.
I served as on the board of the Automotive Retailers Association. I sat on so many boards and have been president of so many boards, including the Edmonton Jewish Federation, and on the board of Jewish Family Services, and the president of Jewish National Fund. So I've been involved in community work for much of my adult life.
Oh, that's lovely.
Even before I became an employee of B'nai B'rith, I sat on the national board for 35 years. So I was very familiar with that organization.
Right.
So my community work goes back many, many years.
Wow. That's really amazing. You've kept yourself quite busy, from what I see.
I've raised 4 children, 7 grandchildren, and now I'm delighted that we have twin great-grandchildren in our lives who are just turned a year old, and they are the love of my life.
Oh, that's special.
They are a little girl and a little boy who live on a cattle ranch west of the city. So,
really?
So I get to go back to my roots.
Yeah.
And walk amongst the cattle.
Oh, wow. That's really lovely. You know, now we talk about anti-racism. This is a subject, you know, that's come to the forefront again. I don't think it's ever going to go away. You know, I'm also a person of color, so I've experienced it myself. But what are your thoughts on, you know, anti-Semitism today? Because it's, you know, I'm still seeing it in the news.
So, we at B'nai B'rith do an audit every year, and we've been doing it for over 30 years. So we're able to trend anti-Semitism. Now, our data comes, we man a 24-hour hotline, so a lot of the data comes from the hotline. We also get data from every hate crimes unit of every police department across Canada. So we're able to put together an audit of anti-Semitic incidences that is pretty accurate. Now that is an audit of reported incidences.
Right.
Of course, there's many more that are not reported.
Correct.
But we are able to track the trends in anti-Semitism. The last few years, there's been an uptick in anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
But I also always have to add that 2023 is not 1942.
Right.
So, okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So keeping that in mind,
Mm-hmm.
I have to say loudly and clearly that as a Jew who's experienced anti-Semitism all of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and the worst kind of anti-Semitism on the date of my birth,
Right.
we Jews are living in the best of times. We haven't had it as good as we have it now in over 2,000 years. So we have a lot to be grateful for, but that doesn't mean that we can let our guard down.
Yeah.
We need to be vigilant. We have to understand that anti-Semitism is alive and well,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to push back on it whenever we can.
Right.
And we have to remind people that what happened to the Jews can happen to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And we're the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
When anti-Semitism becomes virulent, then everybody else had better watch out, because once they've come for us and done with us, they'll come for everybody else.
Right.
So
No.
yeah.
That's very true.
So yes.
Wow.
One of the messages that I try to leave with high school students when I ask to speak to them about the Holocaust is that silence is no longer an option.
That's powerful.
So you have to speak out.
Mm-hmm.
If you see someone being bullied, if you see someone being attacked, racist, homophobic, any injustice, silence is not an option.
Uh-huh.
If when you're silent, it's like being complicit.
Yep.
We have to speak out. We all have a responsibility to speak out. That's the message I try to leave to students: is that we are all players in this play of life.
Mm-hmm.
We're all actors in this, and we have to participate. And if we're going to have a significant impact on racism and hate, it'll only happen when everybody's engaged and everybody speaks out.
That's beautiful.
Bad things happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it may be a cliche now, but it's true. Bad things happen when good people do nothing.
Right.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Yes.
That's a very good one. Thank you so much. But before we close,
Yes.
what I want to know from you, what matters? What message do you want to share with my audience?
So what I would like to share with your audience is 2 words: never again.
Yes.
So never again should it happen
Mm-hmm.
to the Jews. Never again should it happen to anyone.
Yes.
So if we want to ensure that never again rings true, then we have to remember the lessons of history. History is a powerful teacher if we're willing to learn the lessons that history teaches.
Right. Wow. Thank you so much, Abe.
Thank
that
you.
was a wonderful session.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you.